I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to the Freedom Festival as we come into this session. The Freedom Festival was created as a response to the desire to celebrate through conversation and exploration and playful sessions what freedom and independence means, looks like, feels like to all of us. And all of us mean everyone in the United States. That's where it started, although it is an international question. Hey, Kitana. And the question was kicked off with the creation of Juneteenth as a national holiday. Of course, the holiday has been around for 160 years, yet it being a federal holiday happened in 2021. And the question and the challenge that Opal Lee put to us was, what if we celebrated freedom from June 19th to July 4th? And we talked with people who are different from us, and we came together in celebration and exploration. And that was a question. I said, that's something that I can get behind, and that many people over the last 3 years have gotten behind. It started here in Sonoma County, so I'm very excited about the session that we're having today, which is also based in Sonoma County with the Community for Law Enforcement Accountability Now. Yes, we can actually go ahead and do an applause there. I'm going to say just a couple more things. This is one of 22 events taking place in the 16 days. So check out freedomfestivalusa.org where you can see the rest of the events that are taking place. At this moment, I also not only have the privilege of welcoming you to the festival, but I get to play moderator for this session. And so, how this is going to go is that I will very shortly introduce Carl Tenenbaum, and then the panel as a whole, and I'm going to let people introduce each other as they go. Actually, you know what? Do I take no. Yes, I'm going to do it. Carl Tenenbaum. And when I say, if I say your name incorrectly, you're going to correct me. Barbara Gersecki. Kirsten Lang and Alcina Horstman are our panelists and members from the Community for Law Enforcement Accountability Now. And I'm so glad to say their name multiple times because I had been saying committee, but the word is community, and that is a beautiful first word. So I will introduce Carl. Each panel member is going to introduce themselves and say some things. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat. We will likely answer them at the end after the panel has introduced themselves and their relationship. Again, welcome everyone to CLEAN, the acronym for the Community for Law Enforcement Accountability Now, as well as to freedom. And in good style, because we're all in this together, please use your emojis or your hands and give Clean a welcoming applause, appreciation. So at the bottom, there's a react button. You can use, yep, I see some applause. Exactly. We believe in doing this up front because we're inviting people to share what they care about. Thank you. So Carl Tenenbaum. I love those hearts, Carl. I discovered Carl Tenenbaum when he made the courageous act of running for sheriff in Sonoma County. And I say that because it was during a time where we were all paying attention to police brutality and what it meant and what it means to take on how law enforcement can act beyond what is legal, and particularly in relation to Black communities. This was where the main focus at that moment in relation to Black communities, although police brutality is not limited to Black communities. It also focuses, there's also relative to poor communities, and just we will learn more. Actually, I think from the focus and reasons that people come into this of why we want to look at accountability now. But Carl was running as a candidate, and he felt like the person that I saw at the moment that was closest to the people, closest to being responsive to what something other than an established order or system might be. And so I actually joined to volunteer and work as a volunteer coordinator with Carl, and I've really appreciated his continued pursuit of being close to people and on the ground. So, Carl Tenenbaum, thank you for making that stride to campaign. It gives us something to organize around, which I appreciate. And thank you for coming to be part of this conversation. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Holmes. As I like to say, we're here now, so let's go. That was a very flattering introduction. I appreciate it. And also, I'd like to thank you for inviting me and the members of Clean to speak here today. I'd like to note that Nancy Pemberton, our resident attorney of Clean and one of our small five-person group, is unable to join us today. I'm not going to give a bio. I'm just going to read or present what I wrote, and then that should be sort of self-explanatory. The heart of my message today lies in two paradoxes, two contradictions that, in some strange way, make perfect sense to me. The first paradox is this: how did I, someone who spent over 3 decades as a uniformed police officer, depriving countless people of their freedom, end up speaking at the Freedom Festival? I have no doubt that some of you have asked that same question of yourselves. What is this guy doing here? Over time, I've come to realize that my experiences and my evolution as a person and as a professional has actually put me in a unique position to speak about freedom, which is one of the things that Dr. Holmes referred to when I decided to run for sheriff. First of all, I don't think it was a courageous decision or act. I just think it was something that I was compelled to do based on what I knew and what I saw and what freedom is and what it means, how it's protected, and how it's too often and too easily taken away. But to understand how I got here, it's important to reflect not just on my personal story, but on the broader history of policing in America. Now, I know nobody came here for a history lecture, so I'll keep it brief. When I attended the 6 month San Francisco Police Academy in 1981, we received 2 hours of training on the history of policing, 2 hours out of over 1,000 hours of instruction. That crash course in police history included such intriguing topics as the Code of Hammurabi, a Babylonian legal text composed in 1755, the Magna Carta, a royal charter from England in 1215, the teachings of Sir Robert Peel, the second Baronet of England, and the model established by August Vollmer, the first chief of police in Berkeley, California, who was instrumental in militarizing early 20th century police departments, something that we're still dealing with today, and in a lot of ways, even more so. But that's the history of policing that was presented in 1981, and I can guarantee you, having looked it up, they're not teaching much more than that, which is sort of a shame. Those weren't exactly the most timely or topical subject matter for a classroom full of aspiring cops. And none of it really had real world application to society at the time or now. What they didn't teach us in 1981, and what's still rarely taught, is the truth about the origins of policing in this country. And that truth is that in many parts of early America, police forces were often formed to retrieve enslaved people who'd escaped seeking their freedom. Slave patrols were the first organized policing bodies in the US. This part of history is crucial, and yet it was completely omitted from my training. All law enforcement exists to serve a higher authority. That authority might be a monarchy, a democracy, a privileged class, or some other social or political structure. Regardless of the form, the central purpose of law enforcement has historically been to protect property and maintain order. In reality, the people themselves, who the police are comprised of and who they are sworn to protect, should be the final arbiters of police functions. Yet every traffic stop and every detention, every search and every arrest that I participated in was an act of depriving someone of their freedom. Whether it resulted in time spent in jail or not, these were still acts that deprived a person of their liberty, the type of actions the Fourth Amendment was written to restrict. If I had understood that history more fully back then, maybe I would have had a head start on the moral and ethical awakening I'd eventually experience. Over the years, as I responded to countless calls to 911 or worked in specialized enforcement, making thousands of decisions that often resulted in arrest, I began to recognize troubling patterns. First, much of our enforcement efforts were focused on low level infractions that had little impact on public safety. something that's commonly referred to as quality of life crimes. Secondly, our enforcement of those laws was overwhelmingly concentrated in communities of color or in low income communities, and often targeting people struggling to survive, people in need who may be experiencing homelessness, mental health issues, or drug dependency. That realization changed me. It forced me to ask hard questions about the system I was part of. I didn't have the power to change the entire institution, but I came to believe that I could still respond in a way that mattered. One call, one decision, one human interaction at a time. Which brings me to the second paradox, the term freedom fighter. To me, freedom means the right to live without interference, without fear, and with dignity. However, the word fighter evokes images of physical conflict and violence. Yet a freedom fighter doesn't always carry a weapon or throw a punch. Sometimes fighting for freedom means simply standing up, speaking out, or offering a helping hand instead of handcuffs. Reflecting back on my career, what I miss most isn't the badge or the authority that it represented. It was the ability to really help people, to show up and offer resources like calling an ambulance or giving a ride to a shelter or offering a hug. They also didn't teach that at the police academy. Over time, I saw that not arresting someone, not taking away their freedom, was the most powerful form of help I could offer. Now that I'm no longer able to take direct action as a cop, I found new ways to fight for freedom by working with community groups like Clean to bring effective oversight to law enforcement, and by challenging the disparity in the criminal justice system, trying to repair the harm caused by decades of discriminatory enforcement focused more on punishment than on healing. While recently discussing the Freedom Festival with Dr. Holmes, she shared a phrase that resonated with me for a very personal reason, and that I've already used a couple of times today. And that phrase is just show up. So, what does this mean today, here at this version of the Freedom Festival? It means we each have a role to play as long as we just show up and keep showing up. We're all here now, so let's stay involved. Whether it's joining a group of like minded folks or through small acts of kindness, activism, or simply supporting one another, we can all be freedom fighters. Know your neighbors, care for them, be available. We're living in complicated, troubling times, but these are exactly the times when showing up matters most because we all need each other and we all have something to give. Nothing further to add. I am going to graciously hand this off to the president of the Community for Law Enforcement Accountability now, and somebody who has been very close to me for the past several years, and that is President Barbara Grasecci. Barbara, it's you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming this afternoon on a beautiful Friday in Sonoma County. And if you're not in Sonoma County, I hope you're also having a beautiful Friday wherever you are. I've been around Sonoma County for going on about 25 years. And when I first moved to Sonoma County, it was as a refugee from high tech, which is what I did for a living for prior to that. And so the idea of law enforcement or freedom weren't really something I was thinking of back then. But what got me into this fight, and what really caused the origin of Clean, is a tragic incident that happened over a decade ago. And I know many of you are aware of this. In fact, some of you that are in the Zoom were intimately involved in what happened afterwards, and that was the killing of Andy Lopez. Andy Lopez was a 13-year-old boy who was walking down a street in a neighborhood in Santa Rosa with a toy gun. And he was gunned down by a sheriff's deputy who, for many reasons, said he thought it was a real gun. There was a lot around that situation that caused consternation to the community. What is interesting, and to tie into some of what Carl said, is what came out of that is the origin of Clean, and it was the community. The community was at that point done. They were on the street. The students that went to school with Andy Lopez were marching in the streets all the way up to you know, grandmas with their babies. It was universal, the outrage around that, and the response by the county and by the criminal justice system, that the community said this is inadequate. The Board of Supervisors pulled a community group together to say, this is inadequate. What can we do? That community group spent time going out and talking to those that are impacted directly by law enforcement. It took several years for them to come back with recommendations. Most of the recommendations that they made were unfortunately ignored by the sheriff's office. The county didn't do much to enforce any of that. But what they did do is they did create an oversight organization called IOLERA. And this organization is how we in Sonoma County have civilian oversight. Civilian oversight isn't something that's really common everywhere. We're lucky that we have it. And it's been in place for a period, it had been in place for a period of years before CLEAN started. So how did CLEAN come to be? CLEAN came to be because the group IOLERO didn't have enough power to really make those changes. They weren't given adequate resources. They had legal boundaries in front of them. So this group of scrappy activists, and thankfully some really smart attorneys, came together and said, we know how to fix this. We know how to make it stronger. And we want to do that. And we want to put that on the ballot and get Sonoma County voters behind it. This was all happening sort of 2018 up to 2020. So they were all down a path. They were fundraising to get this ballot on the ballot. And they had the language, they had attorneys, and COVID hit. So suddenly gathering signatures to get a ballot initiative on wasn't going to work. So what they did is, again, the community rose up and they were talking to the Board of Supervisors. They were at Board of Supervisors meetings virtually. And every meeting they had, they said, we need to enhance IOLERO. We need to put teeth behind this enforcement. And the community rallied around this list of items that were going to be on this ballot initiative. They got the board to cave. And the way the board caved is they put the initiative on the ballot in 2020. And the work wasn't over there because getting something voted on during COVID is a challenge. I mean, you don't get to go door to door when you're in lockdown. But again, the scrappy group of people and a big community effort advocated for that, and that measure passed. It passed by 65% in Sonoma County in the middle of a pandemic. So yay, Sonoma County. So you think like happy ending to the story, but it's never a happy ending when you talk about trying to right the wrongs of our society as it relates to not only law enforcement, but criminal justice. So that initiative passed. Of course, immediately there was a court challenge. Anyway, long story short, this is the birth of CLEAN. And the reason CLEAN had to be born was, as we know, laws can be written, but often laws are not enforced or not enforced fully. And this is the importance of that civilian oversight. So when CLEAN was founded, it was all about making sure that this new legal capability that we had could be implemented in the most robust fashion possible so that the community could benefit from that oversight. So that's how we got to be, and that's what we do. We're all about that oversight. We're about transparency. We're about accountability for law enforcement. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the system is fair and has access and equity for everyone, which is why personally I have been engaged. I'm really lucky. I didn't have to have a conversation with my teenage son about driving at night at 16 in the family car and getting pulled over. I didn't have to do that. But a lot of people in our community still do. And that's why I'm engaged, because it's time to right the ship and all we need to do is look at the headlines in the last, even just in the last week. The work is still there, and that's what Clean is here to do, and that's why I'm engaged. So thank you again, everyone, for being here. And I am lucky to be able to turn it over to a fellow member of Clean, and we all love each other on Clean. But Kirsten Lange is speaking next, and there's just so much to say about Kirsten. So I'm not going to do it, Kirsten. You have to blow your own horn. But believe me, if we wanted to like have her go down her list of accomplishments, we'd be in the next session. So she's an amazing person, as are all my Clean members. So Kirsten, thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Carl. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kirsten Lange. Really grateful to be able to join you all this afternoon. My journey through freedom is truly rooted in growing up on the family farm in Florida and in Kansas. I learned how to drive, and I'm accustomed to being in the car because my family traveled from California to the Midwest and through Florida all summers long. So that was the only way apparently my parents knew how to get us across country until I discovered that I should ask for a plane ticket. But nonetheless, I spent summers there having to do farm work and still very traditional methods of farming, pumping water from a well, ringing the chickens, slaughtering the animals, picking cotton, shucking corn, riding tractors, pulling the bull. And I realized that even in all the years of my people being free, we really weren't, because we still had to do the labor in order to provide for family. And then sitting in the circles as the elder ladies were plucking the feathers on the chicken or frying and scraping the catfish, I'd listen to their stories very intently, and they'd share some of these very deep, painful stories of, running home from school or being banned at eighth grade or being, passed over for jobs and positions. And it reminded me at that time, even being, 7 or 8 years old, that we're going to still have to work hard. And I refuse to live in a world where that cycle doesn't get disrupted. And I think at that point, it was my earliest commitment to freedom and justice and wanting to exist and wanting to have privilege just like many other people. And I'm grateful that through other non-conventional methods, they made sure I received an education, holding 2 degrees from prestigious institutions, being able to have the freedom to travel, to know my rights, to know to challenge systems. And it's one of those things that I had to learn throughout my formative years, because this was me doing this in kindergarten, that there's a time and a place for the good fight, and there's a time and a place to rally the folks to fight with you towards freedom, even if it just means we get our ice cream Friday and nobody got in trouble, right? Those little simple moments. And it carried out into my adulthood and fight towards justice. And when I came to Sonoma County, in 2012, shortly after, as Barbara mentioned, Annie Lopez was murdered. And I remembered working at one of the ophthalmology offices on 4th Street and just seeing the youth. And it reminded me of my own upbringing in Southern California, being free to march down the street. And seeing that the students were, being adultified, treated like they needed to be monitored as if they couldn't walk down the street and advocate for the death of their peer. And so I remember getting up from my desk and just telling my coworkers, I'll be back if I find my way back. Um, and I joined them. And I remember one of the doctors threatened my job, and I just said, well, if that's the side of justice you'd want to be on, I'll take it. Just leave my bags outside the door. I didn't lose my job, but it reminded me that if we don't fight in those moments, we'll never be able to fight for our smallest freedoms and achievements along the way, even if it sometimes means taking a risk. So when I discovered the ongoing process and development of what is now Clean and Measure P, I've since moved to Southern California and back. And one of our former members heard I was back and gave me a phone call and asked if I'd be interested in getting back in the work. And of course, I'm not going to say no. I enjoyed the team and the community and camaraderie we've built, and have really looked forward to moving this forward and with more community joining us. Um, so thank you for having us. Uh, Alshina, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm usually in the background. I'm the treasurer. I handle the accounting and things like that. But I'm honored to be here talking about concepts of freedom. And ever since you brought it up, I've been meditating on the idea of freedom and the language of freedom. I was thinking about there's a great book called All About Love by Bell Hooks, where she says we use this word love all the time, but we don't necessarily agree on what it means. And I think maybe it's the same with freedom. Um, but I think in the context of law enforcement and justice, when I was a child, I grew up very rural and my parents were kind of bohemian, and I would come home with, homophobic slurs and racial slurs that I didn't know any better. And they would just sit me down and educate me. And so I got some lessons in concepts of justice and oppression very young. And then in my 20s, I tried to join the Peace Corps, and they said, "Well, what volunteer work have you done?" And I said, "None." And they said, "Well, go do some volunteer work and come back later." And I ended up being an academic tutor in a Black neighborhood in Roxbury, Massachusetts, which just kind of blew my mind. I learned all about internalized racism. I learned about my own racism. I had all these kind of paternalistic ideas that had to be deconstructed. And from then on, I kind of was often working in marginalized communities in the arts, with photography and things like that. I ended up in San Francisco, working in the Tenderloin, working with women in drug and alcohol recovery, all kinds of different marginalized groups. And then when I came to Sonoma County, uh, at some point, the news really got to me. And I pulled this thing out earlier. There was an event happening at the Arlene Francis Center, which was a Racial Justice Allies Black Lives Matter dialogue. And when we got there, they said, "What are you going to do? We're not just going to talk. We want you to take some action." And so they had lists around the room of things you might be interested in. And for some reason, I went to the law enforcement corner and I met John Mutz. And we started a little community group called Cole. And the whole purpose of that group was to support the oversight that had just been created. And I had never been involved in politics, and I kind of started learning about politics. And I was one of the founders of the Measure P ballot measure, just kind of a humble person in the corner. But I think, like what Carl said, that Raquel said, is like you just keep showing up. So I didn't know the difference between sheriff office and police department. I got painfully educated knocking on doors when John later ran for sheriff, and I didn't know what I was talking about. But I've had this kind of huge arc of learning, and I just kind of keep showing up. And I passionately believe in justice and freedom. And particularly now, I'm watching all the videos on social media, the immigration issues, the goons that are throwing people to the ground and breaking up families. And I think, in the most literal sense, freedom, dignity, allowing people to live. Um, I guess I'm committed and passionate about those topics, and honored to be here and tell you a tiny bit of my journey there. And very honored to be always, whenever I'm in these kinds of communities, everyone here is committed to these things and cares a lot about our community and cares about racial justice. And yeah, um, I'm not sure what else I would talk about except concepts of freedom. Oh, I really liked what Raquel was said when we talked earlier. I was saying I really like that idea of envisioning what we want, not just what we don't want. Envisioning what we're moving toward, not just what we want to change. And so I really love, there's a huge increase across the country of mental health support so that you don't have to call law enforcement. You can call the teams that will come and help with the mental health thing that's happening. So I kind of, I like to continue to remember to focus on what we're moving toward. And I really like that aspect of this conversation. Nancy did write up how she got involved, and I thought maybe we could take questions or I could just read it. Should I read it?
Please read it.
Okay. I think I can read it in 1 minute. In 1962, when I was 9 years old, my father and I began watching The Defenders, a courtroom drama series that ran from 61 to 65. Not so coincidentally, the early 60s was the golden era of the Earl Warren Court when criminal justice cases came before the court. The Fourth Amendment right to be free from search and seizure without a warrant, the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, the Sixth Amendment right to counsel were all decided during this period. And the defenders addressed these issues thoroughly and dramatically. I was enthralled. It was that show with its David versus Goliath storylines that set my moral compass toward justice and turned me into a staunch advocate for freedom from government oppression. I yearned to be a criminal defense lawyer, standing between the powerful arm of the government and the vulnerable individuals facing criminal charges. Although my early 20s took me in many directions, that moral compass never veered off course. I finally entered law school in 1982, graduating 3 years later and beginning a long career in criminal defense. Eventually, I became a mitigation specialist, developing social histories for people facing capital punishment, with the goal of convincing decision makers not to seek or impose the death penalty. Execution by the government is the ultimate loss of freedom. For me, we should not cede the right to live or die to the government. But there are government limitations on our freedoms we accept. Many of these freedoms we easily cede because the benefit we receive is worth it. We obey traffic laws because we know we risk our lives if we don't. We don't assault each other. We don't trespass. We don't yell fire in a crowded theater. And if we violate these laws, we give our law enforcement agents the power to stop us, to lock us up, and even use deadly force. But we don't, or shouldn't, cede that power to law enforcement without oversight. The freedoms not to be stopped, not to be arrested, not to be locked up, or not to be killed are basic to our existence. They're enshrined in our Constitution. Cherishing those freedoms, which I do, means I must be vigilant to ensure they are taken only when absolutely necessary. That's why I joined CLEAN. It's my responsibility, our responsibilities as member of a free society, to ensure that those to whom we give the power to take our freedoms do so legally, judicially, and only when there is no other choice. That's Nancy, who's out with a surgery. Thank you so much.
It's so powerful. Yeah, I think let's give our panelists already a round of applause. Thank you. So moving. I mean, I'm curious, even as we go in, how it was, what was new for you in hearing each other in this moment. Like, you may have discovered something either about what you're already doing or each other. And then, as our panel's responding to, there are going to be, you all have many questions or things that you want to comment on. So please prepare them. But how is it? Yeah, go ahead, Alcina.
Well, I don't think I knew the part about Kirsten and the farm stuff. I think I might have heard a little bit of it before, but that was really fascinating. So I look forward to asking more about that at our next meeting.
Yeah, and what Alcina said, I think the little tidbits of our histories are kind of interesting, and as well as we know each other and interact, sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't like she said, I didn't know about the farm stuff, or
Yeah.
I'm sure we all have a lot of deep, dark little secrets that aren't so bad. Our histories.
And I'm always amazed that Carl knows all that legal stuff that's from like the before times. I mean, not just before COVID. We're talking like really. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Carl. I mean, I don't think I'm going to remember that, but the Magna Carta, you guys talked about the Magna Carta? Really?
Magna Carta, yeah, and again, they're teaching us stuff from centuries ago, and we're supposed to take that out into the streets of San Francisco and apply it in real time. It just doesn't work that way, okay?
Exactly.
But yeah, and it's just like, yeah,
Yeah, I can imagine you like, with somebody and you're talking to them. It's like, well, let's talk about the Magna Carta now. Like, I don't think that would work, right?
Yeah. Well, what are people thinking in our audience? What questions or comments? And if you can unmute and or write some things in the chat, we will pull them as we go. Um, there's so many things that I think were resonating and appreciative, and just kind of this experience of soaking in what you've already shared of who you are and what you attend to, is meaningful. Well, let's see what people are thinking or have to say or ask?
What, Raquel, one of the questions that I get asked a lot when I talk to people or present like this is people are curious as to are there other police officers who are like-minded? And I always find that to be a really good question because I was immersed in it and I know countless police officers. And my answer is yes, there are a lot of police officers who realize that most cops figured out early on that they're not going to save the world and that they see that the system is really flawed that they're working in. But like a lot of people in other occupations, they choose to just sort of ignore the bad, go about their business, and get their paycheck. And I'm not saying I think that they most law enforcement people, and I'm speaking generally without any supporting data, um, they want to do good. They get into the profession with good intentions, but then a lot of times the system kind of smothers them. There can be real world consequences if you don't go along with the program. So, yes, I know a lot of officers and former officers who think about reform and know the system's not working, that the system's not in harmony. But it's hard to speak out sometimes. If you're an active time working police officer, you run the risk of job insecurity. And then if you're retired, a lot of retired cops unlike me, want to, go golf and relax. So that's my question and my answer to, are there other cops like that? And there are. And I mean, with a national organization called LEAP, and it's comprised of a lot of former and current law enforcement and judicial officers who believe in reforming the system.
Sean, I see you have a question there.
Uh-huh. Um, yeah, I want to echo the appreciation to the panel for being so giving uh, today. Still soaking that in, and um, I thought it. I, I want to share sort of a fantasy moment. I have a fantasy of what the community relationship with law enforcement could look like, and the fantasy that I have is that our law enforcement officers could become experts on due process. I don't think it's a rash statement to say that currently law enforcement officers are not uniformly experts on due process. And I like the what if statement. What if they were? I just wanted to put that into the conversation.
I feel like I wanted to share something briefly. In my bio, I've been doing restorative justice volunteerism for 10 years with a local agency, just as a volunteer. And, and I've never forgotten this one young woman who came in, and when we when I expressed to her that part of it was, exploring her feelings, that allowed her to take the action that she took. She was so resistant to speaking about her feelings that she asked if she could just go back to jail. And I kind of feel, for some reason, felt compelled to put that here because I think part of the work is for us to express our feelings and model talking about our feelings and make that part of the work that we do.
I I do wonder where that lives in the experience, and I think this came up at different points, Carl. There was, as you were running the campaign, because I'm in the what is the support for conversation on feeling, both on the police or sheriff side, as well as the vehicles for community expression. So, um, whether it's feeling out loud together, like the march, Kirsten, that like the kids are there, their emotions are in the street, in movement, right? So there's a vehicle in some ways for that, which is why that's so important. Um, and like different ways that we can continue to create vehicles for public emotion, right? Public expression of emotion. And what does that look like structurally relative to law enforcement or how we keep organizing in the communities? I wonder what that invokes for you all.
You know, in response to the beginning of your question, you know, what does the community law enforcement relationship look like? And I think, and it sort of touches a little bit on what Sean touched on about his fantasy. It's the lack of training. You know, they having been in it, it's law enforcement is treated like it's some sort of, it's like it's a mystery. It's like there's a secret there. And really, you know, you people don't know what it's about. I do. And that's coupled with all of the other, you know, the fear-based training. And I also, you know, I use the word training because a police academy is almost like a vocational school. And, you know, in all of my activism work, and even when I was working as a police officer, you know, people talk about the European models. There are different countries in the world that they teach their police officers like university courses. And you know, so being an expert, I forget what the subject matter was that you brought up, Shep, but just being on expert on anything, they have these as opposed to teaching about probable cause and really getting into that, or Fourth Amendment. There's very little instruction on due process or the Constitution, because they're just, you know, they're trying to get all this training into one thing. But getting back to your question, Raquel, you know, community policing is to take down some of the shields that law enforcement has built over time and to stop doing it the way we've done it. And earlier there was discussions about, you know, alternative responders, you know, mental health people and, you know, drug, you know, people that are having drug issues. Those aren't police problems. Those are social issues that we need to address. So in a perfect world, we take down the walls and the barriers. We allow people to come in, and we also, what clean does in encouraging other people to get involved with law enforcement oversight is to ensure that it's done, you know, equitably and fairly, and that, you know, that it's more than just having, you know, coffee with a cop. It's more than some, you know, performative type exercise where it's really bringing people into the police facility or doing stuff that doesn't, the more, you know, there's a lot of effort put into the community policing model right now. Well, that works both ways, and it's not just how the police, you know, police the community, but it's how the community polices the police. So it kind of, it's a two-way street. And it really does come down to, if we had a better teaching model, if we had a better educational system for the cops and for the system, I think we could make a lot more progress.
I just wanted to share a little piece too that I learned from my engagement in Clean is just the first word of our organization is community, and just the importance of community in changing the way law enforcement works in our county, in our cities, is so important. And when I think back, if you think back to like the time of the civil rights movement, you know, when civil rights and voting rights were passed, you know, the first thing that happened was an entire uh, group of Jim Crow laws were passed all through the South and other places. So so like there's this Measure P was kind of like the civil rights law. You have a law, but until the community gets engaged, realizing that is like it is difficult. The inertia of organizations, the inertia of community is something that you're fighting against when you're trying to make that social progress, when you're trying to change an institution, which is really hard to do, something as old as law enforcement. So community, that word community, is just key. And you know, that's why we are always trying to encourage people. We do a lot of educational webinars. We go to the community advisory committee meeting of the IOLERO group. And that staying engaged as a community is what has enabled us to make the progress that we have. And of course, we still have a long way to go. But that community, just that word community, is so important to freedom.
And James, I'd like to just acknowledge some of what you're putting in the chat. I think what's important for, if you're not familiar with Clean's work, that is a part of the community education that we provide. We are by no means a anti-law enforcement organization, but we are centered and focused on communicating the expectations that both we as community members can hold of them just as much as they expect to hold from us. And that trust in our work has not always been a two-way street, which is why we exist. That young man and many others in our community who have lost their lives at the hand of our sheriff's deputies and other officers due to reckless actions because they didn't trust that community had their best interest at hand while they were still in uniform trying to do their job. And that's why we've continued to host ongoing educational series so that both entities are coming to the table, even if we are the conduit often, to help them understand each other, right? If your job is to protect and serve, you can't be afraid of me because I'm black and I have purple hair, right? You should be able to speak to me just as much as the next person. Part of what we've pushed a lot across all departments in our county is language access. For the entire sheriff's department to have no one who speaks Spanish when the 60% of the residents here only speak Spanish is apparent. And in that feedback that we've provided, we've seen the change of demographics in Santa Rosa Police Department, Roanoke Park Police Department, Petaluma Police Department, Sebastopol Police Department, right? Because if you're really committed to protecting and serving, you also need to reflect the people for which the community you cover.
Hello, and thank you all so very much for being here and sharing what you're working on with us. And I work in a similar capacity. I have a podcast that's about amplifying the voice of the people. And I reach out to government figures from every level, city to federal. And I've been doing a lot of the what if questions for everybody. What do we want? Stop and take a breath. What do we want from our city, our state, our government? Because I think there's been a lot of runaway from all different aspects, and there's a lot of chaos. And so we kind of got to pause a moment, take a breath, and just stop and ask ourselves, what do we want? And understanding that civics has been removed from the schools for quite some time. My children are in their 30s and now reaching 40 for this year. They're like the last group that know anything about civics. And as you were saying, Carl, I mean, this and everybody else up there too, it's both ways, right? We need to understand the systems, and we need to be participants. We need to be able to show up, as Dr. Holmes said, when we show up for ourselves, we show up for our community. And I would just like to ask one question to all of you on our panel. What is kind of your vision for that what if we could have that perfect moment, what would it look like for you? Thank you.
I'll go first. For me, it would be freedom from tyranny, freedom from oppression. And what does that look like? It would be law enforcement. I keep referring to these young authors that are science fiction authors. They're called Octavia's Brood. And they talk about how science fiction is you can kind of fantasize about what you want. So if I was really fantasizing, it would be, no weapons in our streets, including on law enforcement, maybe something like the Europe model. It would be I like the idea and I've never kind of committed to it, but community safety, when I lived in Oakland, I had a neighbor and we used to avoid cops at all. You know, we would try to go out and do things ourselves and we were always told it was dangerous and we were always successful. So we would just kind of say, what's going on? What's going on? You know, and so I really love the idea that we could just police ourselves in a gentle way and our neighbors and not have to call the police. And there are all kinds of programs that I haven't yet committed to, but I like the idea. Like, what if the neighborhood watch was actually not having to call the police because the homeless guy wants to get a drink out of my hose? I don't mind if he gets a drink out of my hose. My neighbors sometimes do. And I'm saying, what's the problem? Let him get a drink out of the hose. So I think my fantasy is that we open our hearts a lot more and work together as a community a lot more in smaller localized ways. And I'm hearts and flowers all over here because this is how I live and I get to do that. Someone was saying I'm a bookkeeper and sometimes I sign off with flowers and I'm bringing that here too. Like I just think I get to do that. I get to have an open heart and bring that to this kind of conversation. So anyway, that's my share.
I'm going to jump in because something that occurred to me just now. I think the perfect moment for me is when we dispel all the fear and the fear mongering, which really drives a lot of these conversations and a lot of the dialogue. And I know that there are enough legitimate threats out there that we should be concerned about, global issues and local issues. But we just, we're seeing it, we're seeing a lot of it, what's happening here. And again, the training that police officers received, and when they're sent out on the street, they're so pumped full of fear that every person presents a threat. And, they're not explicit about which person where doing what. Everything is predicated on it's a crime, but the reality is much, much more different. And that's why you're seeing many, many more incidents of bad police decisions making, having fatal consequences. So yeah, my perfect moment is when we stop being afraid and we come forward as a community and work towards bringing about more changes that will benefit all of us.
I mean, ideally, a world where organizations like ours and many others who have been fighting the good fight for hundreds of years don't have to fight the fight. We could help inspire the memory and the joy and the songs and the history that comes into the wisdom from our elders and ancestors, where we can reflect and we don't have to be so thick in the knees of just every day some new battle is confronting us. That's like my version of whimsical, not so many flowers. But ideally just where like this work phases out, just that we don't have to work so hard to make it happen.
So I guess I'm last, and my my view of where I'd like the world to go is a one where there's a lot more kindness and love, and less us and them, and that's a big ask right now in our world. But that bridging of the divide so that you know we don't report on next door. I'm worried because there's a brown person in my neighborhood. I had to get off next door. I don't know if any of you are on next door. You're probably off by now, right? It's this kind of knee jerk concern about people that don't look like us. Maybe they don't talk like us. Maybe they don't speak our language. Is hard. It's hard for everyone. It makes us hard for the people that have those views, that lock themselves in their houses, but it also makes it hard for just everyday people. Um, and I think that is something that's not just like a community thing, but it's our institutions need to get there too. And we need to push our institutions. We need to push our elected officials to do that as well. Um, so that we actually can fulfill um, a, a desire to really help people that need help and build up communities that need community and repair a lot of the harms that our community has inflicted on specifically communities of color for generations. And that's what I see, a lot of love and understanding.
Thank you so much. I share those sentiments exactly.
Thank you. I have James and then Rochelle's unmuted and just to say, so the session is billed till 4 o'clock, which is actually soon. And I know that the panel had talked about possibly extending some time, but I just want to check in on that. And then, of course, the audience has their own clocks as well. Panel, are you able to stay a bit longer? Excellent. So people know that. And then, James, you had a question, Rochelle?
Let Rochelle go first, please.
Oh, well, first I'm very appreciative of the panel and how much information you imparted, particularly the historical aspect. That really always helps me. Um, and I was wondering from any of you, and I was thinking particularly of Carl, it, what it, how you've seen improvement in the relationships between the law enforcement and the community since you started your particular work in 2018, I believe you said it was. And several people have said, people like us, that we don't have to be afraid of people like us. Well, what you're talking about is so huge as far as conditioning in this country. I'm afraid of people who look like me because it's more than color. Class is just so subtly interwoven. And for years, I never even had a conversation that included class, other than schools had classes. I mean, that was it. But it's deep. It's deep who we're afraid of. And some of the cops are black, and I'm afraid of them because blue becomes the color. Um, so I'm just curious about how you see some changes from, and I'm not saying there should be huge changes, but what have you seen?
I I don't want this to be a treatise on police behavior, but working backwards, when you talked about being afraid of black police officers, I worked with police officers of every conceivable persuasion. And what I saw a lot of is when people become police officers, they go through conditioning program and then they become co-opted. And that's the sad reality. And then to your original question, I can't speak authoritatively because I've been away from it for 10 years, but one of the things that compelled me to run for sheriff was as a young cop, as a rookie cop, I walked a beat in San Francisco, so I was very connected to my community. And there were a lot, that was a thing back then. I mean, back in the day, it was, every major metropolitan city had beat cops. And they were a part of that particular community, especially if they worked for a long time, like I did. And over time, I felt like there was a shift where they were, I say more educated, but they were training more technically, but they were also doing more detaching from the community, and I think the most glaring example for me personally is how police and the sheriffs are dressed nowadays compared to the way that they were in the past. And I realize that times are theoretically, and I say theoretically because again, this is part of the um, fear selling that's done. Times are theoretically more dangerous, but not to the point that we need cops or sheriff's deputies showing up looking like they're, in Fallujah. And so it's a really glaring example. And I think it's also a little bit, I don't know if irony is the right word, but this emphasis on community policing, where we're going to train people to learn how to interact. it takes more than that. And again, I really lean on educating officers to where they have a more nuanced view of what they're doing. So the long answer is I don't think that police community relations are as good as they once were. That's also due to a lot of attrition. People don't want to get into law enforcement now. So there's less law enforcement personnel. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's easier money to be made other places, and they don't know what the job is. They don't understand because they've been pulled in so many directions, mental health and dealing with homelessness and everything else. So I don't really think that it's improved. I don't have an answer to how it would get better. But that's what I see. And the thing that if there was a burr under my saddle when I was running for sheriff, is the number of people that really, really went out of their way to explain to me that I was a cop and these are sheriffs and I don't know what they're going through. And the reality is, you put on any uniform, and I don't care if you're working in a fast food joint or if you're a deputy sheriff, you treat people with dignity and respect. And a really good cop or a really good deputy knows how to avoid trouble or getting hurt, or there are other options. But yeah, I just feel that the climate in the country has been for a long time has been leaning that way. So I feel that the relationship with the community is not as good as it should be, but I'm also optimistic that we can repair it.
Thank you.
James, you have a question still, and then
Not so much a question, so much as I mean, if I were to present any strategic perspective on how it indirectly answers Rochelle's question, ironically. If we were to say like, how would you proceed in improving the situation? I feel like first off, like what I don't remember the names. I do apologize. I've been kind of listening, but the names are kind of not matching the faces, so I do apologize if I say the wrong person. Someone had mentioned something about how there's this line between us and them, and the first step there that needs to go bye bye. There can't be an us and them. It's hard for you to trust someone to protect you, and you don't know them. I feel like much like politicians, we should, as a community, know who's our law enforcement. We should be introduced to them formally before they show up at our house when we randomly make a call because we need help. It's kind of hard to expect that the person that you don't know who knocks on your door and to help you is there to do that, right? It's a very difficult scenario and paradigm. So I feel like there should be some sort of community say or weighing in where these law enforcement officials are introduced to the community formally. Like when you appoint a new officer, there should be like a council thing where they introduce them to these people so that we know who we're looking at. We're not presuming this, like think about the ICE thing that's been going on. They don't have any uniform. They just show up and they snatch up and they put you in the car. Think about how impersonal it is, and then think about it when you get law enforcement. There's a knee-jerk response like, "What are they here for?" A lot of times, the person who comes to get to the door is not the person who called you. Sometimes it's someone in the back who might be a little bit nervous that the person who now answers the door might sabotage them. It might be a kid who's just been through a really traumatic experience. So I feel like if you know the person, it's easier to confide and trust in them. So that whole barrier of us versus them, we need to take that away. When we go to work for the day, we clock in, but like for the most part, if you work in a grocery store, they know that you work in a grocery store, right? They know they're a person serving your food, so they can kind of at some level trust you and see that you're a person. And as I was saying in the chat, I know that's hard because when you clock in, you're asked to leave your humanity at the clock in turntable. You're asked to leave it there. You're not supposed to bring emotion, any of that. But if you want someone to trust you, you can't be presented as a machine or an object. You have to be a person. And that's why I feel like law enforcement, you kind of have to know who your law enforcement people are. It can't just be some random person in uniform. We've had people pranking nowadays who wear uniforms like they're law enforcement and then they're just messing with people. So it's very hard to know who's actually there to help you. So I feel like the important part is we need to know our law enforcement. What you guys are doing is kind of doing that. But I feel like there needs to be systems in play where people know who the law enforcement are so they can trust them, because it's really hard to trust the strangers there to help you. That's like, I'm going to put in a sense that may not agree with everybody. The devil knock on your door. Hey, I'm here to help you. You got the horns and everything. Like, I can't trust you to help me. I don't know what you're here for. It's like when you get the people in the suitcase, they want to hand you a pamphlet. I don't know you. Why am I answering my door for you? So I feel like that's the first step we need to take. We need to erode this barrier of impersonality. There's a trust that has to be there on both sides. I do apologize for the strong wording I'm using, but I feel like that's the important way it needs to be. I feel like that's the first step. We need to know who's here to protect and serve us. Can't just be a random person who was hired yesterday. It's not going to work.
You if I could just jump in, you just did a better job of explaining community policing than I did. Okay, just know that, because that's exactly what it is. If you know your officer, if the officer knows the community, and it doesn't have to be confined to a geographical district or a boundary. I talk about educating cops. If you think about it, it's so much of the propaganda, like, every agency that I can think of, including Santa Rosa up here in Sonoma, they have the Citizens Academy. The sheriff's office has a citizen. Well, what is a Citizens Academy? It takes a group of civilians and it puts them into the police environment. And those civilians are taught, yes, how it works and why cops do what they do. But there's a lot of apologizing that goes on. There's a lot of justifying that goes on. What you don't see is you don't see 5 or 10 cops or deputies being sent out to the community college to take classes there, to interact with the people there. So there's a real, when I talk about community policing, it goes both ways. And it's just, again, law enforcement is treated as insular. It's like to me, living through it, it was like the Wizard of Oz. There's this big secret, and you don't want to pull back the curtain. And like, oh, these are just regular folks that are coming to work, and they've got a very unique job. It has its moments of danger and it has its moments of complexity, but it's just a job. I mean, I don't want to diminish it. I really, I feel that most people do it for the right reason, and I did it because I thought it was an honorable and noble profession. I still think it is, but it's been so diluted and corrupted. And to your other point, James, that earlier in the chat you said, use the term protect and serve. And I always bristle a little bit because that was the LAPD model on their car doors. And anybody that knows anything about policing in America knows that the LAPD is not a beacon of humanitarian behavior. Um, but it begs the question, and this is what I do a deep dive on: who is law enforcement protecting? And who are they serving? And I think that's always the big question. And the flip side of that, to your point, is if we treated each other with respect and dignity, not just the cops, if it worked both ways, again, if we, I love my job because I loved the people that I dealt with on the streets. The cops were one thing, um, but that's the key to really getting back to the community relationship and having interactions and good. The fantasy is just that.
Enid has a question for us, and Jim Duffy has added that if you follow the local Sonoma County on social media, they regularly post pictures of the new hires and promotions. So for folks who find that helpful. And I think there's both the seeing and the relationship that Carl you're speaking to. Enid.
Actually, I don't have a question, but a comment. Thank you all to the panel. I've been listening very, very intently, and what I'm missing is the word or the phrase humans. We are not relating to each other as humans. We see each other as uniforms. We see each other in fear, powerful, weaponized uniforms, and that's where the fear is perpetuated. Years ago, when I was teaching in Rohnert Park in the elementary school, we had Officer Friendly would come to our classroom unannounced regularly in uniform and sit down with us and read stories to us. This was in first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. He would sit with the kids at lunch. He would walk and play ball with them on the playground. He would come, and the kids all called him Officer Friendly. His name was Larry Jones. This is something I think if we could replicate and have in all of our schools, children would not be afraid of the uniform or the person or the human who's representing them. They would have a chance to establish a relationship and intimacy. The other thing I was going to quickly say is that there's two things here. There's a collective accountability and responsibility and an individual accountability and responsibility. And these two have to marry, I believe. We have to, as you said, Raquel, show up, but not only show up, but also have a purpose for you showing up, knowing that we are relating to other human beings. We are in the same community. We are sharing the same planet. These are other human beings in a job that has been specialized. Unfortunately, because of certain circumstances, it's been weaponized, but we don't have to buy that. We don't have to believe the hype that they are not to protect and serve. They're not there to protect and serve. They're human beings working to provide us with a type of safety. And that is one of the basic elements that we all need as humans, to be living in an environment that is safe. That safety is based on relationship trust. It's a very intimate relationship, very, very intimate, where you look in someone's eyes and not look at a mask face that's been covered up, but we are actually being seen, and they see us and we see them. And that's the we and us that can be melted, that can easily be melted. With the pronouns being the way they are, we have to actually be careful of our language and be critical of it, and perhaps start thinking and using the perception of humans. We are humans, flawed humans with all types of similarities and differences. We are humans. That's what I was going to share.
Thank you, Enid. I wonder if any panel want to respond, and I know that Danny would like to ask the next question.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Carl, for inviting me to this. And bear with me because I'm nervous as heck and having all these great people in this room talking about issues that are really affecting our community and our nation. And one of the things I want to first mention was we were talking about freedom, and I asked myself, what is freedom? Because I believe freedom is more than a physical act; it's a mental thing. For our immigrants who and even U.S. citizens who are in our nation right now, scared to leave their homes because they might get caught up with ICE, they might get thrown on the ground, they may get treated like our community members in the shadows have been treated for years. And freedom for me really starts with with a question and a thought that you ask yourself. For example, today, when you ask yourself, what am I going to do today when I leave the house? People that don't have the freedoms we have are going to ask themselves, am I going to be able to come back home? Am I going to be able to go to the store, buy milk for my family, and not get stopped and harassed by police or by ICE? These are the simple, basic questions that we sometimes take for granted and we just walk out with no issues. But our community, not only through ICE, but also through the police, uh, we ask ourselves these questions, and that's so painful for these people who don't even know if their child is going to make it back home or their husband that went to work and make it back home. There's so many videos out there that portray these images of a father or a mother that went to work and never came back home because she was painted as an illegal immigrant. Um, and I've had my own personal experiences being an immigrant child where I was brought here when I was 4 years old. And the experiences that I went through, I wouldn't want any other child to go through. Yet I've also now going into uh, what a gentleman said earlier about we got to get rid of us and them because it's we all are one. And I'll tell you, I've worked with police officers in a previous life of work that I did, and there's some great officers out there that just want to do the right thing. There's some officers out there that I would invite them home for dinner. There's officers that I wouldn't even want to buy them a Happy Meal. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to identify behaviors and we have to look at accountability. And we always hear the cliche of one bad apple ruins the crate, right? But how are we going to identify that bad apple? We can't just with the broad stroke of a brush say they're all bad because they're not. There's some great officers out there, and I believe that even though through my experiences, it's all about training and through my experiences of what I've gone through in life, I've been working and getting feedback from Carl and Danny Rosati, who's helping me on creating a program that I've been working on called Stops with Dignity. And the stops with dignity, basically what that is it's like creating a comment card on the experience that you had with an officer. So we can gather this information and identify trends. And you know, if we have one officer that continuously is pulling people, giving tickets for speeding, but you look and you see that it's always a person of color, now you might say, hey, there might be an issue here. But if you see an officer that's continuously giving speeding tickets and it doesn't matter or the information doesn't support that they're being selective, then God bless him. He wants to make sure we have safe streets. So, in order, the way I looked at it is, I need to create a program that has information from our community members that we get together, because the police has their own information and they're not going to give it to you. They're not going to tell you that they have one officer doing X, Y, and Z. But if we have that information as a community and we are able to identify specifics with date, time, where it happened, and the people that it's happening to, now there's really no pushback that we can get from on officers when we say, here's an officer that has done X, Y, and Z, and we have the data to prove it. Now they can't say, oh, no, that's not going to work. But now because and sometimes I ramble on because I get excited about it. But I will finish with this.
Sure.
With the data that I want to be able to gather with Sauce with Dignity, I want to have the voice for those that don't have the voices, because that breaks my heart when I see these videos of people that can't even go to work without, you know. Okay, I'm gonna
Mm.
stop. So I'm getting emotional, but I think there's a way
Absolutely.
that we can all gather some information and really be the voices for these people that we are pushing for. And I really appreciate the people that are in this room that are doing that for my community. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I think your community, our community, if we're continuing to push on removing the us and the them, and I'm looking forward to what you have for Stop Dignity. I think we're working to add many voices to, and this is, I have so many thoughts. I mean, one aspect of the Freedom Festival was there was a particular anti-police brutality. That's such a, but um, rally that had been happening nearby, where there was a person who was saying something, a black man who was saying something that wasn't appreciated at the time, in the moment at which he was saying it, and there was an experience of wanting to take the mic from him, and it was that we need to continue to create environments in which we have voices and that all of the voices can be heard, which is part of the Freedom Festival and its creation. Jim, I saw you unmute, so I want to invite you to say what you have to say, and then I will actually move us towards a close. One, just so you know, panel, I do want to ask you if there are things you want to invite this audience, which includes people from different places, many Californians, some in Atlanta, others who are in Nevada, and other parts of the country. But if there's something you want to invite us to, uh, either to do or to be at. Um, Jim, did you have an interest in asking a question or a comment? Was it an accidental unmute? And you may chat as well. And that means Jim Duffy. This is who I was speaking at. Because since we have two.
Oh, I didn't unmute. My connection is spotty and I disappeared and it reconnected.
Ah,
Sorry.
gotcha. No, sorry. Glad to have heard your voice. So that, yes, that question, I've just also I'm going to lean in on the science thing for a moment. Scientists, as we go into our careers, we have a passion for something, something we're interested in that we want to discover. The training we receive tells us to not say anything about our personal selves. It tells us to not speak with passion. It tells us that we have to be only literal, reference only previous created works, don't dream aloud. It is an experience of conditioning that molds people into speaking in particular ways. And I'm saying that because, Carl, I heard you when you said when people go into policing and they are conditioned. So there's something not just about the individual apple, it's about the barrel that they're put into and how that barrel then shapes what's possible. So my invitation to you, Clean, who is looking at what it is to be in dialogue, to do education, is to invite us into and it may just be simple sign up for our newsletter, show up at the next thing, whatever. But whatever invitation you have for us to support the changing of the barrel and to being engaged.
That's very powerful. And I just want to add that I put my email address in the chat. And that's because this is a forum on freedom, but I know that people are always fascinated with the concept and how police work functions and how it operates. And anybody that wants to pursue a discussion is very encouraged to reach out to me. And I just want to let you know that I'm available to talk about this more.
And I just mentioned that Altina posted as well that if you, we do have a newsletter. So if you want to be hearing about what our next webinar is and when that is, if you, we don't fill your email inbox. So it's not like you're going to get a ton of stuff, which I know like everyone is like, how many emails do I get a day? It's just too much. But that is an option, and it's a way to stay updated on the various things we're doing. If you're specifically interested in learning more about what IOLERO is doing, the Community Advisory Council, which is separate from IOLERO, it's appointed members from each district in the county. They meet monthly, and they are looking at making recommendations on a regular basis to the sheriff's office. So it's a great way, you know, one great example is in the last months, there's been so much concern about our immigrant community. And so they asked the sheriff to come to the meeting and tell us what you're doing. And so he gave a great presentation on how they're making sure they don't cooperate closely with ICE and what the holes are in that. Because some of the information that ICE gets, they're legally able to do, and it's nothing to do with the sheriffs. And the sheriffs often not happy about that also. But it's a great way to just learn more, and also a way for us to hold them accountable when something does go wrong in our community. Like, you know, a couple years ago when the farm worker was shot, that was a terrible experience, and that's a great place to go and say, hey, we don't like this, we want to know more, we want to make sure you investigate what happened within your department, and that IOLERO, the independent agency, does the same, and that we hear about it and we hear what you're going to do to change. So that's a couple of things. All those things, I put the link to the website in there. All those things are available on the website, and we just encourage you to get engaged to the extent you want. And the one last thing I'll say is, like, what if you're saying, but I live in Sebastopol, what's happening there? We have a list of all of the law enforcement agencies that exist in Sonoma County. And you could look up your agency, you can get the link to go to it, you could find out if they have oversight, and you can learn more about specifically what your local community within Sonoma County is doing. So those are just some ways to get engaged.
And join us. We're just 5 little scrappy people. If you're local, join us.
Awesome. Kirsten, do you have a last?
Think if you're already not dialed in to your community and oversight or civic engagement and activism, this is my invitation for you to consider doing the same, even if it's just reading Little Leaders books to the kiddos at the libraries once a week. Something to stay engaged in the work, because I know capacity varies for so many of us.
Thank you all so much. Huge round of applause for our open forum, our community and law enforcement accountability now clean. Thank you so much. I did just add into the chat, the Freedom Festival is a grassroots organized activity. It is built by people donating, which then goes into the support of programs online and anything else that is needed to continue to offer free programming that educates and brings people together in celebratory work and having it all, joy and pain. So there's some other sessions that are coming up that are local. There's a conversation with artists at Johnny's Java tomorrow, 10:30 to 12, as well as a reception that is on the website. You'll find it there, freedomfestivalusa.org, if you go to the site. A discussion on anime, free will, and determinism online tomorrow. And the conversation with Hakeem Oluseyi, Black astrophysicist from the Science Channel, and also the CEO of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, who will be in conversation, as we are now, on what it's like to come from rural Mississippi to then go to Tougaloo College and Stanford and be one of the leading astrophysicists in the country. So, anywho, It's here at the Freedom Festival. What does freedom look like through that journey? And our journey together has been fabulous. Thank you, panel, again. Thank you all for showing up. Freedom Festival 2025 is going. Woohoo! Thank you for being here. See you soon.
Bye. Thank you.